Hey guys, and welcome to day 14 of Inktober. We've officially made it to the 2-week mark, which is extremely exciting. It definitely gives a little bit of perspective and a little bit of a motivational boost to keep on plugging along until the end of this challenge. So going into today's piece, I was definitely a little confused. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, and I'm starting to feel a little bit drained for ideas. And I have lists of concepts for illustrations that I can sort through and try to pull from, but none of them were really calling to me. And if there's anything I've learned over the past 2 weeks, is that with daily illustration, you really need to love what it is you're doing. Because if you go into a day without completely loving the idea that you go in with, you might not be as happy with the result as you want to be. So today's piece is a little bit on the simpler side, but I did know that I wanted to do a night sky, and the contrast was what really stood out in my mind. I wanted the night sky to be almost black, a very, very dark gray. And then I wanted to use a white gel pen to pull out the stars. And then I wanted the figure to also be fairly light, have a mid-tone for the skin, and then pale hair and a dressing gown or something of that nature. And I pushed myself a little bit with the angle of the face, as I've been talking about throughout this entire month. I've really been trying new face angles. So instead of doing something that was primarily focused on the front of the face, I really only drew the back side of the face and a lot of the hair. And in order to tie this piece into the rest of the collection I've been creating this Inktober, I ended up putting some roses in her hair as well. And roses, I think, are something that are fairly simple to draw once you get the hang of them, but also hold a lot of meaning and depth, and I like the way they look, and they work well with the colors that I'm using this Inktober. So all around, they have a lot of good things going for them, and I've incorporated them into a lot of my Inktober illustrations this year. So even though this piece, I think, is fairly aesthetically pleasing to look at, it is on the simpler side, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I've talked about that a couple of times, about how having some time to take a break or do something a little simpler isn't necessarily a bad thing, especially when you're trying to do something like a full-out illustration every day for an entire month. Typically, I'm only doing full illustrations 2 or 3 times a week, and when I'm only doing them 2 or 3 times a week, I have time to slow down and think through each step and actually push my boundaries further. And there's not really as much of a need to do something simpler. That's what my sketchbook is for, and I have been doing those types of experiments and studies in my sketchbook. And that's something I really only picked up over the past 5 or 6 days, maybe, because before that I wasn't working in my sketchbook at all since the beginning of Inktober, because I was so focused on finished illustrations. But I realized I was forgetting why I do art in the first place, and I was starting to become more stressed with the process of illustrating than I was enjoying it. And enjoyment of the process is the whole reason I draw. And so when you are finding that you're stressing a little bit, when you've dedicated time every day for a month-long challenge, it's okay to take days to yourself and say, okay, my art is for me. And I've been dedicated this month. I've been doing a lot of full illustrations where I'm pushing myself. And so it's okay if I just do something on a simpler scale, where it's still nice to look at, but not quite as intricate or not as complicated. For me, this piece has a lot of details in it. There are a lot of stars. I didn't count, but I mean, there has to be almost 75, if not 100. And I made sure to focus on a interesting hairstyle, one that kind of parodies the hairstyle I had done in my Victorian piece. but it's kind of twisted and knotted and has a lot of intricacy to that. However, the pose and composition are on the simpler side. So although there are details in the piece, and there are ways I'm pushing myself, for example, in the pose itself and the position of the head, there's a lot of relaxation to this piece as well. And quite frankly, I'm a little bit surprised this is the first night sky I've done this Inktober, because I've always really enjoyed painting skies. Especially night skies, because the process of bringing out the stars is one of the most enjoyable processes in any illustration to me. So once my dark background had been applied, I could not wait to pull out a white gel pen and just put little dots all over the sky. And it took a while, but it's a very soothing process for me. It's very mindless. And I did think a little bit about where I wanted the shinier stars to be, but for the most part, I was just putting dots all over the dark background. But in the end, it comes across as very detailed and very interesting. And this is something I'm still trying to figure out, this balance of detail and actual complicated compositions. I think it's good to have a balance, to have a little bit of both, to have some pieces that are more simple and some that are more complicated, but you don't want the simple pieces to be boring. And so finding ways to make these simple pieces interesting is part of the enjoyment to me. A lot of times I will do this with the hair. Sometimes I will give the character interesting facial features. I will give them freckles or scars or tattoos or something to spruce it up a little bit. And in this piece, the background is the complicated thing. The actual nightgown of the character is very simple. It's white and has a little bit of frilly edge, but not a whole lot of detail added in with pen. It's a lot of implied detail, but not actually executed detail. And that was on purpose. I was thinking about incorporating lace details, especially to the trim. But in the end, I decided it would be more interesting if the nightgown was completely simple and then that contrasted with the pattern of the background, which is almost opposite of what I normally do. So anything that's different than what you normally do is by default going to be interesting in comparison. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. The link to the original piece available for purchase will be listed in the description. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.